Welcome to the show where we focus on Mother Africa. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. This week, we begin a three-part special as we look into the refugee situation, particularly Kakuma camp. We release a report, Yes, in My Backyard, compiled by the World Bank. We get your views on the issues. And as always, we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gishuru. This week on Africa Leadership Dialogues, we start a three-part special on refugees. This is kicked off by a World Bank UNHCR report titled Yes, in My Backyard, which took a look at Kakuma refugee camp, analyzing the economics of refugees and their social dynamics. We start this week with a panel session. On our panel, Siddharth Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator, Kenya. Dr. Abbas Gullet, Secretary General, Kenya Red Cross Society. And Pete Vowles, Country Director, DFID Kenya. Let's get straight to their views on the refugee situation in Kenya. 90% of refugees in the world are hosted by developing countries. My question to each of you, my first question, considering your experience and your knowledge of what's happening on the ground, what's your takeout from the data that has just been presented by Apurva? And Sid, I'll start with you.
I first went to Turkana back in the year 2000, which was the launch point for Operation Lifeline Sudan. Without Lokichokyo, there would have been no Lifeline Sudan, which led to the survival during a dire conflict and a famine. Without the presence of Kakuma, without the presence of Lokichokyo, without the presence of the initiative of the locals to actually allow such a huge humanitarian program to be waged, it could not have happened. So on all three counts, I think it's an exciting chapter that we are starting off on, and I couldn't agree more. Personally, for me, I come from a refugee family. My parents were refugees from the partition of India and became productive citizens in India. My father came from Bangladesh now, and my mother came from Pakistan on the other side. And they became productive citizens within the country. I just think the opportunity that is there is fantastic. I would just say one more thing. When you look at the Asian tigers and you look at Western Europe, you're experiencing a demographic echo, which basically means the average age of Kenya and that of the surrounding countries is at about 18. The average age in Sweden and the surrounding countries is about 47. The average age amongst the Asian tigers is at about 50. What you need to keep Western Europe and the engines of the economic wheels moving is a younger population. Invest in the skills, education, human capital of these refugees. You will actually have a trained human resource that is also not just available in Africa, but throughout the world.
I mean, for me, sitting and listening to Apurva speaking, it brings a lot of memories for where I have worked myself with refugee population in many parts of this continent, starting from Tanzania with Malawi with the Mozambican refugees that were all over Southern Africa in the 80s and 90s, going to Uganda, or South Sudanese refugees coming into Khartoum with 4 million IDPs, looking at Benako camp in Tanzania, which was then the largest population of refugees in the continent, but more importantly, more recently here in Kenya and in Dadaab. And just to say that, the same what has been said of Turkana could be the same of Dadaab, and maybe Dadaab even much more bigger economically. But just really to say that for me, primarily the best example I use of what has been described in Zambia. And over 30 years ago, the then president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, realized the importance of refugee integration. And the Mozambican refugees went to Zambia, were given 1 year assistance, but each of them was given 5 acres of land. They were given assistance for 1 year, and they were told in 1 year you'll be on your own. And indeed they were on their own. And 400 kilometers from Lusaka, in 1 year, people from Lusaka would go to this place to go and buy their groceries and their vegetables and their food, because these people were very resilient and they were able to become actually Zambian citizens at the end of the day and didn't want to go to Mozambique at the end of the day. So when we talk about our case, and I think as the discussions continue, we'll talk, but Kenya could have handled, should have handled this population of refugees, those who wanted to stay and integrate differently. And we can look at cases that were in Moyale, in Walda, in the 80s, and those who are from Uganda who came and went back. But today, I think good examples of Uganda, where Uganda has integrated refugees. Right. In fact, some from Kenya and some from other parts of the region.
Right, thank you for that, Abbas. Pete?
Thank you. I think building on Abbas's point, I think it's finding the small tweaks that make the connections between host communities and refugees. And I think if you look at Kakuma camp, you look at the health facility, it's a fantastic health facility, but it's right in the middle of Kakuma. I don't know which one, 2 or 3, but right in the middle. It's a long way from where the communities live, host communities live. You look at the great work that UNHCR have been leading on with the governor on Kalo Bay, where actually they've decided to put the health facility right on the outskirts of the camp. So actually making it very clear that even though host communities are pastoralists and don't want to settle, they can actually access it. It's open for them. You go and you talk to traders that through working with WFP, and you see local communities coming in and selling their goods to refugee communities, and suddenly you've got an interaction, and you talk to the people and they're interacting and they see the benefits of each other being there, and suddenly you're breaking down these barriers between people living inside and living outside, and the sense that you have a kind of lose-lose at the moment, but actually could you have a win-win where people actually start to interact and see the benefits of interacting. So I guess that's some of for me, one of the simple things that actually there's small tweaks. It's just where you position the health centre. It's how you operate the market. But that's going to make a difference to how communities and that sort of sense of social cohesion, even though people have different backgrounds.
I'm coming to the floor now. I want to go back to Sid's comment that he made. And he actually said, why don't we just deal with the root cause of this problem? Why don't we ensure there are no refugees fleeing country? I'm just going to throw something out there to the policymakers and ask the question, is there a way to ensure that if countries interfere with the governance or issues in other countries, that they have to then bear a financial or a real actual burden in terms of refugees? Just some of these things. What can we do?
Thank you, Julie. My name is George Oko. I'm sure you all observed and saw what happened in Gambia. If Gambia was in East Africa, we would now be having 200,000 refugees and talking about that camp. And I must congratulate the ECOWAS, the people who really went in there and made sure people went back to their homes and lived peacefully. So, Apuvi, I think this is a good study, and you say that I don't want to talk about why there are refugees. We must talk about why there are refugees. Nobody wants to leave their home. And there will be some refugees, and we must take care of them. And I congratulate those who have taken care of Kakuma being there. Very, very impressive what's been done.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
We have other refugees coming into Kenya. Burundi could be another hotspot happening. We don't know what's going to happen there. So this remains a very real situation for Kenya, for our neighbors as well, and for this continent. My question to you, Sid, now. Some countries, Uganda, for example, has been pointed out, have integrated refugees. Some countries, like Kenya, use the camps. If you were asked today to provide a way forward, what would that ideal way forward look like? Is it a combination? Is it fully integration? How do you ensure a host community, as was mentioned there, is represented as strongly as refugee communities when they come in? How do you ensure equity?
Thanks, Julie. So like Apurva actually said that, Kenya has become an unintended shock absorber of instability in the region. And I think we need to look at the macro picture of why this instability has been so protracted over a period of time. And maybe have we failed as an international community? Have we failed collectively in trying to prevent some of these conflicts from bearing out? I mean, if we look at the story of South Sudan or Somalia, it's just like as if the wheels of inadvertency has just kept continuing to roll. And it's just in that situation forever. whatsoever. So perhaps we just have to redouble efforts, first of all, to deal with some of these issues and not make countries like Kenya and Ethiopia become those unintended shock absorbers. Number two, I think Kenya should be applauded for the generosity that it actually first of all put in front amongst everybody else. It didn't start off as a high income growth country. It did that with that sense of traditional African hospitality of embracing these refugees. But now what that moment is, that I think how public policy needs to be defined is, where do you find the value? These are perhaps the greatest champions Kenya has, who've grown up in these refugee camps. And that is why that investment in them becomes even more crucial, because not only are they necessary and productive people here, but they are necessary and productive people back in their home country as they start to integrate there.
So many people facing famine. Resources are not enough. There is a very real struggle between balancing, and I'll come back to the issue of health that Sid has just mentioned. With your hospital as Kenya Red Cross right now in Dadaab, which I visited recently, the Red Cross has opened it up to both the host community and the refugee community. However, in other areas, there are very many issues around that divide. You know, refugees get allowances every month. We have to struggle. There is environmental degradation that's going on. Who's accountable for that? If you look at the situation and you had to give us an ideal way forward that works for both the refugees and the host communities, what would that look like?
Well, thank you, Julie. In agreeing what Sid had said, on one hand, on the maternal child health, quite clear that one part, maybe 90% achieved, the other part not achieved. I think this is where the challenge comes in. And the challenge that I've seen in my experience is that there's always the challenge between the host community and the refugee community. And the report has shown within the vicinity of the camp 3% increase or 7% in income. But if you look at beyond that, then what happens? And if I go to the Dadaab, the example that I would use, we got there by default in 2011. It was a similar time like now, the famine of 2011. Somalis fleeing the conflict and the drought and the famine coming into Kenya. It became a political issue. Finally, they were allowed. The new camps of Evo 2 was opened up. And sadly, because of the insecurity and Al-Shabaab, there was an attack in this camp, and there was MSF, 3 medical personnel, Spain, that were taken as hostages. And that's how we came into, by default, managing the Evo 2 camp for and on behalf of UNHCR, one as an implementing partner and the other side of the camp as an operating partner. To me, the biggest shock was almost 22 or 23 years of having those refugees in Dadaab. They were basically being referred from the health facilities in Dadaab to Garissa Provincial Hospital or to Nairobi for referral cases for over 22 years. And to me, this was really shocking. The host community had their health facility in Dadaab town, but not in the camps. So they were not accessing those camps in a way. So for me, the logical thing was to say, build a level 5 hospital that would be a referral for all refugee population within Dadaab itself to begin with, so that you don't need to go to Garissa, leave alone thinking of going to Nairobi. And more importantly, for the host community. And I know then the local leadership was pushing UNHCR to revamp and build afresh the existing health facility that was a sub-district hospital within the Dadaab town.
Give us a global overview. So there's the actual numbers and where they are, but there's also the financing. What's the way forward?
I don't know whether I'm qualified necessarily on that, but I think it is a massive challenge. I don't think we can assume that ODA resources, international development resources, are going to continue to rise as they have been in the last decade and a half. I think there's more and more pressure on international resources as we see right now. More and more pressure given just the sheer scale of the number of refugees and protracted crises. If the average age of a refugee is 17 years in a camp, So we can't assume that there's going to just be continuing rise. So I guess that's where we have to find these innovative solutions. How do we bring in private sector models? How do we bring in, think about camps as urban centers, Dadaab as the fourth largest city in Kenya. How do we think of it as a center rather than a refugee camp? And I guess that's how you generate that, not relying on an endless flow of international resource. I think it's a challenge.
As we wind up, let's just keep in mind that things are shifting very fast. It is great news that a fund has been announced. April is when it starts, $100 million, I think it was, to help host communities. It's critical because when a host community is wishing they were a refugee, that means essentially they are a refugee in their own country. They're not treated as one. And so this is really important towards resolving the challenges we have. And we have many challenges. Let's recognize the challenge and rise to it. And someone who is going to speak to close today has his own challenges. He's been in the development world, humanitarian world as well. Now he's in the political world, Governor of Turkana. Let's give a warm welcome to Governor Josephat Nanok as he gives us our closing remarks.
The Turkana County now, the key economic drivers to me right now are not only the refugee camps, the work that development partners are doing, but devolution is a very key driver of the local economy in Turkana. Third is the ongoing oil exploration, private sector-led oil exploration in Turkana. It's quite a lot of significant that it is contributing, even within Kakuma itself, and all other parts of Turkana, but more so with development partners, because the support you're providing to the local businesses, to the refugee businesses, the support you're providing in the cash transfers, particularly the ones being implemented by DFID and WFP, are playing a very huge role to put cash onto the hands of some of the very impoverished households. So all this contribution looked together will give you a very good picture of the level of household economy in that county. The issues about the fact that refugees have been a very good impact on the local economy. Yes, I want to agree more. That cumulatively, that impact has been gotten. What you would hear previously from host communities is complaints about being given few opportunities in jobs, in businesses, seeing themselves inside the refugee camp is a heaven of water and food, while they had literal outside. And I think those complaints will get better resolved once the pilot of the new Kaloboyi settlement achieves its intended objectives. So once that is achieved, and to me, when I engaged UNHCR and the national government, Ministry of Interior, over the issue about when the numbers were soaring in Kakuma, and UNHCR wanted new land to put the surplus refugees in, we said no. I think Turkana has had experiences of major interventions. And I think one was the one that was mentioned, Operation Lifeline Sudan in Lokichogyo, a program that I worked with for quite a number of years. But also the experiences of the way Kakuma was designed earlier. And the feeling of both the people and ourselves in the leadership was that I think we've got to achieve something that benefits both. Number one, you need a dignified refugee. You don't need a refugee who feels that they are visitors, even when they are very far. And the best way to make him or her feel they are at home is to integrate them.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Fascinating insights there. Let's get to your views now on the issues.
This week we asked you, in your view, which is the best way of solving the world refugee crisis? Stevenson Dambuki says, governments should open up safe routes to sanctuary for refugees in order to allow people to reunite with their relatives.
Hi, I'm Mariam and I'm watching ALD from Nairobi. I think there's several ways in which the world can deal with the refugee crisis, but I think ultimately it will be dealing with what caused the refugee crisis in the first place. I think if we don't resolve that issue, then we'll have a perpetual refugee crisis going on. So stabilizing areas, especially around the Middle East and parts of Africa that have been war-torn or filled with rebels and all sorts of issues. So eventually we'll have to make sure that all these countries are stable. It may sound utopian, but at the end of the day, if everyone is safe in their home, then we wouldn't have a refugee crisis.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
And now to Africa's top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the most populous refugee camps in Africa. The aim of the research was to determine the countries which have been host to the most refugees. Refugees are people fleeing conflict or persecution. Life as a refugee can be difficult to imagine, but it is a terrifying reality for nearly 20 million people in the world. This is according to Refugee Economics and Social Dynamics. Starting us off at number 10 is Katumba in Tanzania. It is the oldest refugee settlement, going back to 1972. It provides refuge to 66,416 refugees. At number 9 is Yida Refugee Camp on the border of Sudan and South Sudan. It is an unplanned settlement and sprouted from the Second Sudanese Civil War. It hosts 70,331 refugees. Slotted in at number 8 is the Evo Refugee Camp. It is one of the 5 refugee camps that make up the Dadaab complex. It hosts up to 84,089 refugees. In 7th position is the Dagahale Refugee Camp. As part of the Dadaab complex, it was rapidly built in the 1990s and it holds a population of 87,223 refugees. Positioned at number 6 is Nakivale Refugee Camp. It is mentioned as being one of the best places to be a refugee. It is home to more than 100,000 refugees. At number 5 is Nyarugusu, located in the western province of Kigoma, Tanzania. It is one of the best-known refugee camps of the 21st century. It currently hosts up to 150,000 refugees. Hagadera takes the number 4 spot. Being part of the Dadaab complex, it's stationed in southeastern Kenya and hosts almost 105,998,000 refugees. Anchored in at number 3 is Kakuma, located in the northwestern part of Kenya. It was established in 1992 and currently the camp hosts over 184,000 refugees. Coming in at number 2 is Dolo Ado Refugee Camp. It is made up of 5 refugee camps. It is one of the districts in the Somalia region of Ethiopia. It hosts up to 216,800 refugees. At number 1 this week is Bidi Bidi Refugee Camp at the small Ugandan border town of Yumbe. It is home to 270,000 refugees, most of whom fled the violence and upheaval in South Sudan. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
As always, we close with words of African wisdom. Our proverb this week goes,
"Tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today."
Thank you for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Remember, you may see a refugee as a stranger, but there is nothing guaranteeing that you might not be the refugee tomorrow. So what role can we play? Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.